John Bianchi, welcome to the REI Diamond Show. How are you today?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to have you here. So I'm recording from Chicago today. It's where I live. The listeners know usually that is how I start the episode. Whereabouts in the country are you located?
I'm up in Canada, actually.
Oh,
So
sweet. So out of the country.
out of the country, yeah. I'm
Cool.
2 hours north of Detroit, which is the easiest way for every American to generally know where I am.
Yeah, the way the maps are, I think I saw a fun fact that like when we look at the map flat, it makes Canada look like absolutely humongous compared to like how it would look on the globe.
Yep.
Is that true?
It's big. I mean, it's the second biggest country in the world. But if you
Okay.
have you seen that tool where you can pull countries and like move them to see their actual size?
I haven't.
Okay, so it's a cool, you should look it up. It's pretty cool. And on the website, you can grab like Russia and bring it down to sort of the equator where everything is actually equal in size. And you can see that it's Canada and any northern country is overexpanded by a lot just to fill that map. So anyways, you can bring it down and you can actually see, but Canada is the second largest country.
Yeah,
Most of,
that's go ahead.
I was gonna say almost all of it is uninhabitable though.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the 2 hours north of Detroit. Yep, makes sense to me.
A lot easier.
So I found in my research for today's episode that you started off in the Airbnb space with a handful of units in Chicago. Would you mind starting the origination story there and then getting to how
Yeah.
your business looks today?
Yeah, I was just about to get into it, and mention that I absolutely love Chicago. It's my favorite place. Like Chicago in the summer is one of the best places to live ever, right? The waterfront, everything you can do there. So, great memories from Chicago. But what the way I got to Chicago was I was actually looking to try and go anywhere in the country that was going to be really profitable for short-term rentals, right?
Hmm.
And as an analyst and data analyst, I looked everywhere, like genuinely everywhere. And I thought Florida was the place to be with the way that I was trying to do things. I was trying to do rental arbitrage at the time without getting too into it. You rent somebody's house and you put it up on Airbnb, right? Not a great business model in the long run. I know that nowadays. But Florida was looking amazing. I actually went down to Florida, drove around to 7 different cities over a 1 month period, trying to make it work down in Florida and failed flat on my face and just woke up one morning and drove 24 hours back to Canada. Like was like, I'm done. And I took off. And at that time, I had actually left and sold another business to go do this. And I thought Florida was going to be it. And it just wasn't whatsoever. And so I was trying to figure out like where do I go now? Right? Like where the hell am I supposed to go? I had raised money from people. I, told my family I was leaving and all of a sudden I'm back. Like I feel like an absolute loser. And
Hmm.
so now I'm like, okay, where do we go? And the two options I had were Chicago or San Diego. And having already gone a quick of 24 hours away, I'm like, let's just go to Chicago. It's a lot closer. We'll make it work out there. And yeah, so anyways, ended up in Chicago. Figured out where exactly to go within Chicago, which was Lincoln Park. That was like the gold mine when it came to short-term rentals, specifically 4 bedrooms if you could set them up a proper way. And within the first 2 weeks, had 3 properties ready to go. Or I'd found 3 properties, 3 landlords who were willing to rent it out to me to turn it into short-term rentals. Over the next month and a half, I got those all up and running. Ended up after a 2 year period having about 15 up and running, handful of rental arbitrage, handful of property management. Had my own cleaning company out there as well, and it was going well. And then COVID came around and wiped that all out pretty quickly. Luckily, I still had the contract, still had the ownership of them, and was able to sell that to somebody else, which was its own fiasco. But then the main thing that I really got out of this entire process of what I built up in Chicago was I realized that I was really, really good at analyzing Airbnb data to be able to find properties that were going to work out really well. And that there was a ridiculous amount of people in the Airbnb space that did not know how to do that whatsoever. So through that realization, I'm kind of an opportunist. And I figured out that I could offer that service of analyzing Airbnb data to people. And I have been doing that for almost a little over 3 years now. And it's just continued to snowball and I've continued to build a business from there.
Nice. So your main business now is helping individual investors. I mean, obviously, if some corporate entity came, you'd probably help them too. Find the most profitable rentals in the country, in the market. What
Yeah.
I come to you and I'm like, John, I want to be an Airbnb investor. I want to get short-term rental.
Hmm.
Is your first question like where, or are you kind of guiding me to the location that's hot right now?
I'm going to guide you because the reality is that the vast majority of markets and properties do not work as Airbnbs. Like the vast majority. If I were to put a number to it, it'd be 99%, if not more, of homes do not work out as short-term rentals, just based off of the amount that you have to pay for them, what the expenses are going to be, and what your expected annual revenue would be. The goal is for it to cash flow, right? It's a business, not necessarily just like a long-term rental. It's a business. And so majority of the places don't work. And so I've studied 350 markets over the past year and a half, and I have a handful of markets that I strongly believe, well, that I know work extremely well and significantly better than pretty well all those other markets, right? And so if you come to me and you're like, hey, I want to buy a property in Boise, Idaho that's going to cash flow really well, I'm going to go, good luck. It doesn't exist. It's not going to work unless you find some fixer upper or your building or something else like that, right? So then if you come to me and you're like, I want a property that cash flows well, I go, okay, sounds good. Based on your budget and your preferences, I'm going to figure out what market is best for you and which property within that market is going to be best. I'm going to tell you exactly how you got to set it up, drive the most amount of revenue, and beat out your competition. So that's what we do.
Nice. What would be the top three markets if I'm working with a budget of $500,000 and I'm going to put 25% down? So that's 125,000 down. And I got another 70 grand to outfit all the furniture and the finishes. So I'm working with this $500,000 house probably budget. Where would I want to go?
So, unfortunately, this is the only question I cannot answer. I apologize. I should have said this before we got started. The only question I cannot answer, and the reason being is because I have studied a ridiculous amount of markets, right? And I do believe that the markets that we kind of push people to are some of the best markets in the country. And if I go and tell everybody those markets, it's actually a really big disservice to my investors who are we're like hundreds of investors right now, right? And within the investment fund we've been working with, there's thousands of investors. We don't want to flood those markets with new investors who are dumping a crazy amount of money in there and then outperforming their homes or outdoing their homes and being okay with taking less cash flow. And then all of a sudden, these homes that we're helping people get aren't going to be cash flowing in a year from now, right? That's happened multiple times from influencers who will buy a property in a certain area, then tell everyone to go buy there. Then their equity goes up, then they sell, and then they go to another place, right? I'm not going to do that to my investors. And so unfortunately, that's the only question I cannot answer. I hope you understand.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's intellectual property. I totally get that um, decision. It makes
Yeah.
sense. And
What I,
it brings up probably a good point. We have my first Airbnb was in Chicago. It was just like I had this vacant apartment unit. A friend of mine had like 25 of them all over the place in the city, and all of them were doing great. And like, didn't matter the market, 2017, 18, around then.
hmm,
So 19, I turned it into an Airbnb, and it probably made like the same amount in my pocket as if I would have just rented it.
yeah.
So COVID hit, same thing that you said, and I'm like, it's the end of that. Like we're renting it out the old-fashioned way. I'm actually supposed to settle on that property and get rid of it today, thank God. And
Oh,
like
nice. Okay.
damn near break even. I'm sure there's some profit, but not to justify the 6 years worth of holding that I have on that. That's a
Jesus.
whole nother story. And then I have an Airbnb in Florida as well. And so my experience and the people that I talk to with Airbnb is it's a tough long-term business, right? You're either going to get in there and I guess you're building 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, and now you have a full-time job because you're like managing the cleaners and you got, guests damaging the property. And it's like, it's a heavy lift. There's a lot of effort for that additional cash flow that may be incremental. And then you have a lot of um, systemic risk from townships and neighbors. So
Yeah.
everybody that I've known who has done Airbnb stopped doing it now. They kind of have
Mm,
your story, they kind of have my story. They're not thrilled, with the exception of like the Airbnb managers that I know, and a lot of them don't own the property either. Um, Maybe some of that comes from the oversaturation, right? You say, hey, here's this great short-term rental market, and now the influencer says, hey, go buy here. They sell their property, and now it's oversaturated and everybody's competing against each other. That's happening to me in Florida, Gulf Coast Florida, unincorporated Pinellas County. it's amazing the number of short-term rentals that popped up since I bought there, I guess a year and a half, 2 years ago. That may change now that that area has lost something like 100,000 plus houses to flooding and hurricane damage, and luckily mine didn't get hit. But maybe you could kind of touch on the oversaturation risk and maybe how to
Mhm.
identify that and
Yeah,
avoid it. I mean, you're helping your clients to avoid it by not mentioning which markets they should go look at
that's
right now.
yep, that's definitely one way that we do this. So before I get into the saturation idea, everything that you just said was spot on, like to a T, in the sense that a lot of people will get started and then they get host fatigue is another one as well, where people just get exhausted, right? And then they stop doing it, or they want to stop doing it, or they want somebody else to do it, or maybe they're, like you said, incremental revenue. Maybe they're not making, $40,000 in profit from the property, so it's not worth the time and the effort. They're only making like $2,000 a year, and so like, why would they put so much effort into it? Those are real scenarios, right? And so the way that I think about Airbnb has to be long term. I used to be a financial advisor before. You study investments and you try to have that investment mindset, right? The key to an Airbnb or to a property is how long can you hold it for? Because the longer you can hold it for, the better off you're likely going to be. Same with stocks, right? The idea is you want to buy it and never even look at it ever again. Ideally, I know there's, a lot of people who manage their portfolios, but the reason I'm saying this is because Airbnb as an industry is still fairly new, and it actually kind of got cut at the knees during COVID and sort of reset in a way. So any industry though constantly gets better. Think of the first iPhone compared to the iPhone we have now. Think of vehicles in the 50s compared to vehicles now, right? They're always improving. And Airbnbs are no different. Even hotels are continually improving. I walk into like brand new hotel rooms and I love it. I'm like a kid in a candy store because I think they're so optimally done. It's the most beautiful, most well thought out thing. And it's so like small, but it's perfect, right? And I just love that. So what I'm trying to say here is that Airbnb as an industry is still evolving. And if it is still evolving, then you are going to have better and better listings that are going to continually show up that are going to outperform the ones that existed before. So whereas back in like 2017, 2018, you could just get any listing and it didn't have to have anything other than a bed and a couch and kitchen supply, and you'd be able to rent it out and make some money. But now everybody has that, right? That's just the bare minimum. So then, therefore, how do you outperform them? Well, now you got to have a pickleball court and a pool and this and that, and your photos got to be great and blah, 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 blah. And it kind of continues forever, right? And so the idea is just trying to keep optimize these listings to make them better than the competition. So the way that I think about this is like, where is the industry going? Where is it going to be? And how do we put together a listing that can stand not the test of time, but maybe the next 5 years? So you can make enough money from that property over that time period to make it worth it. So first, you got to start off with the market and make sure that's not oversaturated. You can do that by just simply looking at using AirDNA and look at how much has the properties, the supply, increased year over year. Okay. And say if you can see that all of the supply has increased by 10%. Great. Then you want to look at the revenue and see how much the revenue has increased year over year as well. And if the revenue has also gone up by 10%, that's good. Now, there's a third component to this, which is has the occupancy stayed steady as well? Because the supply could go up, but it could be a whole bunch of 5 bedrooms that showed up, right? And the supply went up and the revenue went up equal amount, but really it should have went up more because there was a lot of these large properties that should have been driving even more revenue. And you see that the occupancy actually dipped by 10% year over year. And so what that's telling you is that not every individual listing is making the same amount of money year over year. So you need all of these to go up equally, with always having revenue outpacing supply. That's the one thing you want the most. You want revenue to be going up by at least more, if not the same as supply. And then the occupancy shouldn't really change all that much. And then you're in a non-saturated market. Okay. I know it's kind of complicated. I just did a 2-hour conversation with the chief economist of AirDNA, and we walked through it in every single last little detail. So if you really, really, really want to figure it out, you can hop over and figure that out on my YouTube channel. But the idea here is you want to make sure the market's not saturated, but then you also want to build out the listing to be able to compete for the next 5 years so that one, your property doesn't stop losing money during that time period. But then two, if we do hit a recession, right? And this is the main thing that I do with all of my clients. I explain to every single last one of them is that we are going to hit a recession. It doesn't matter if it's next year or 5 years from now, we are going to hit a recession no matter what. And so the way that I try to help my clients avoid oversaturation and a recession and losing their money due to these two reasons is by having a great property so that when that time comes where, there was 1,000 people traveling before, but now there's only 100 people traveling, those 100 people are booking out their listings because they have the properties that are in the top 10 percentile of that market. And so if they were to lower their nightly rate, they're going to match up with the other people who don't have as desirable of listings because maybe they don't have all these extra features and value that they're offering. And so then therefore, their home will get booked, but the other home will not get booked. And they can keep having some cash flow come through that allows them to carry through the recession so that after the recession, they hit the boom, they haven't had to sell their property during that worst time period just to cover the bills. It's a very long answer. Do you want me to summarize it or did I get the gist of it out?
No, no, you hit the gist of it. We had I think Scott Shatford may have been one of the founders or the founder of AirDNA back when it was a year or two old, I think, at the time he came on the show. It's interesting
Wow.
to hear that that's been such a phenomenal data source for everybody in the business. AirDNA is like the MLS for short-term rentals, right?
Uh, sort of yes and no. So AirDNA has the data, so it gives you the projections of how much every single Airbnb has been making over the past 365 days for every single property around the world. Is that what the MLS does as well when it
The
comes to
MLS
long-term?
does comps for properties, and I think the audience who's flipping houses and doing rentals, we're logging into the MLS every day. And I'm
Gotcha.
guessing you're logging into AirDNA pretty often.
Every day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
So it fits.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Spot on then.
How
Yeah.
important is it to be a super host and getting bookings? I mean, if you are not a super host, does that screw things up?
So I haven't seen it screw things up. Like it's the chief economist, we were going through this like literally just last week, so it's perfect timing on all of this. But he was showing that having 5-star reviews made like a 10, I think it was like a 10 or 15% bump in your revenue projections. And I believe if you had the super host as well, and there's one other badge you could get as well. If you had all three of these, it was like great. It helped you get an extra bump in everything, right? It made sure you're always on the first page, one of the most top recommended, all that kind of stuff. So it just gets your property clicked more often, booked more often, right? Helpful. If you don't have it, does that mean you're going to fail? You're going to lose money? You're not going to make money? Not at all. You can have a 4.7 and no superhost status and still be able to get your property booked at a really nice high ADR because you can fix management, right? You can get better at managing the property. You can do a better job the next time compared to the last time, right? And so people have that sort of faith in you that like, hey, I see you have a 4.6 stars, but please, like, I hope you've learned these lessons from the past little bit because the reason somebody would take that risk is because they see that your property is so desirable and they want it, right? So if you have a property that is great in the way that it's put together and designed and everything, that's really what people want more than anything. And they're willing to take a risk on that property, even if you still have low reviews, because you can fix that. But what you can't fix very easily is a really bad listing that's not desirable that nobody really wants. So yeah, if you have a bad listing and you're also a bad host, yeah, you're not going to get booked, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I remember Scott when he was on, and he's like, because I had mine, it was like somewhat dated. My property, it was like usable, and he's like, no, no, it's like in a great location. It's much more about the location and the number of people that it can sleep. It doesn't even have to be renovated. And like how things have changed in that 6 year
Oh yeah.
period.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Big time. But then that's it's a new industry, right? Like
Hmm.
it's just a new industry. It is what it is. Like the T model at one point, Henry Ford's, one of his first vehicles was one of the only options. It wasn't a great vehicle, but it was mass produced and you could get it, right? And then all of a sudden they start making better ones and like, well, why would we buy that one? Right? So it's just how every industry goes.
So we're recording today. It's October 3rd, and most of the country, I mean, this will probably come out in a few weeks, maybe a month, but the cleanup's not going to be done from the storm. And two of the short-term rental markets that I know about at all are like Smoky Mountains, Asheville, North Carolina area, and West Coast, Florida, both of which happen to get hit by the hurricane. Have you heard anything on the ground? Any of your investors? What do you think the impact will be? for tourism over the next year or two and for the short-term rental owners who happen to be in those areas?
Great question. Um, I honestly don't know. I just be guessing, right? And I'll give you my best guess, but can I paint a perfect picture? No. Um, I would need to study what happened with the last hurricanes. So one of the last ones that went through Cape Coral, I've been very curious about like what happened after that, because Cape Coral got really badly flooded and they have like 10,000 Airbnb listings, or they did
Hmm.
at one point, right? So I would want to take a look into that to get like a better feel as to what would happen there. But my assumption is that there's going to be a handful of people, probably quite a bit, that are, going to have to fix their listings and improve them, and all of the things that you would naturally have to do after a hurricane would happen, right? Um, what I'm thinking about is like, are people going to still travel there?
That's right.
And right, like, and so I think knowing Americans, especially in these sort of tourist towns where they like things to be well kept, well put together, things along those lines, especially like Asheville is what I'm thinking. And I mean, the Gulf Coast, big time too. Um, I would assume that they would want to improve it as fast as they possibly could to continue to bring the tourism in, because that's how those sort of areas survive, right? And so they need people coming back as fast as they could. We are heading into the holiday season, which is not necessarily the normal travel time. Like it's not like the summer or March or snowboarding season or something like that. So there are a handful of months ahead of us where it's going to be slow season, and that could give them time to get things going, get things moving. And I would assume, just like most things, after a handful of time has passed, everyone's sort of past it, right? They've kind of forgotten about it and moved on to the next big thing that's happening. And people will start just naturally touring to those areas as they would before. And knowing the seasonalities of both of those markets, which would be obviously like Asheville's going to lose the fall changing of the colors time period, which is, usually a pretty busy time for them. I know I just said it was slow time, but that is a big time for them. Um, I would hope that the listings and the travel could be picking back up at least by March, so that the people who do have those Airbnbs and people who are traveling to those areas during March, they're starting to get the strong bookings as they would have expected. And then into the next summer, it's kind of back to the norm for the most part. Now, I'm sure not everybody's going to be back to the norm. There's still going to be a lot of issues, but if I'm thinking it through, like that's my expectations of what could happen. I'm not sure, again, not sure if I answered that well. And like I said right at the very beginning, I really don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, and I had probably those same exact guesses. The only other guess that might be helpful is if there's owners who have property that still is intact and functional and they don't have to do an insurance claim and a large rebuild. I think I haven't seen it in my own, but mine's kind of blocked off too for some family stuff. But I think we'll see workers are going to have to influx to the area, and I think people will have potentially some risk of damage from these like sometimes rough workers that come to the property and like to drink a lot and stuff,
Mhm.
just known from some other storm chasing businesses I've been around involved
Okay.
in over the years. um, they're not going to be as easy as the families probably on the property, but I think that the rentals would occur. I think you're right. I think it's a 6 month runway, at least. And a lot of the people that I know who had some damage, it's 2 or 3 feet of floodwater, and that's it. He said it wasn't even raining in Tampa, buddy of mine, John. It wasn't even raining. And the water just
Jeez.
came up because they were like on the backside of the storm. It came up through the sewers, and they're like sitting in their house watching the water come up to 2 feet or something, and then it finally just receded. But it's a lack of 2x4s. It's a lack of labor when 100,000 houses are going to need the work. It's a
Yeah.
lack of insurance adjusters who can get out there with cameras and process the claims. It's a shortage when you have this massive rebuild that occurs.
Hmm.
And one of the theories about Florida being such a boom and bust and having such dramatic increases in value over the year that I heard was that it was because of the hurricanes, not in spite of the hurricanes. And the theory that I forget who said it to me, probably someone in Florida, but the theory they shared was you have this forced renewal Where in Fort Myers and Cape Coral, when that hurricane hit, a lot of people are like, either they don't have insurance or like, I don't feel like rebuilding. And so they're selling these houses that are on all the barrier islands as teardowns, completely flood damage destroyed, take whatever check they're going to get, sell the land, and they're never going to deal with a hurricane again. They're buying somewhere where the hurricane risk will be minimal. But now you have this new, flood resistant house, hurricane resistant house that shows up in its place and sells for 1.5 or $2 million, where the old house was 600,000, 700,000, and the lot was probably worth 350,000. So if you look at that phenomenon occurring for the last, 150 years or however long Florida's been populated, certainly since air conditioning was invented, is when people
Yeah.
really started to be able to develop Florida. It could be one of the reasons you'll see this new resetting of the higher comps, and it's kind of like you wouldn't see that in Chicago. We're not going to have 100,000
Right.
new construction houses that occur in Chicago, like knock on wood, unless some black swan event were to occur, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never even thought about it in that way. There's also like as you say that as well, this take Miami, Fort Lauderdale, all the way up that East Coast, right? Uh there's only so much space that's available there. So if you actually look at, because then it backs onto, is it the Everglades?
Yeah, the Everglades are right there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it backs right onto the Everglades where you can't really do anything. So not only are homes, let's say in those areas, well, kind of being
Renewed
wrecked,
every so
right?
often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So think about that flood zone. No one wants to build in the flood zone. So they go, okay, well, we can't use that land. And then they go, well, we actually can't use the land over here either because of the Everglades. And it's okay, well, we only have this tiny little spot, and everyone wants to be there because it's such a great place to be. So then all of a sudden you have this insane demand just due to lack of land. Interesting. I
Yeah,
like
and,
that.
and
That's a
in
good insight.
Pinellas County where I bought two, I went down a deep dive on vacant land. So one of our business models is entitling the land and then selling it to a builder. So get it approved. It takes a year. Sell it to a builder. Make some money on the development, even though there's still trees there and we haven't actually moved a single piece of dirt or stone.
Hmm.
But examined all of Pinellas County. I was shocked at how little land is actually left. I mean, there are not many big parcels at all in
Hmm.
Pinellas County. So Pinellas County is like one of those. I guess it's like a peninsula on the Gulf Coast, and the whole thing is like almost covered in houses. There's no farmland like out in
Yeah.
Hillsborough where Tampa is. There's still a lot of that farmland. You could still go farther before you'd hit Central, but people clearly want to live near the water. So yeah, I digress.
No, that's actually fascinating. Now I'm also intrigued by your land business and I want to pick your brain about that one. But um, interesting, all of it. It's like it's this sort of macro thing that's happening, right? That's a little bit that is very specific to Florida in this case, right? But I'm sure now maybe you'll see those effects out in Nashville as well as people sort of go, all right, well, we're not going here. Let's build out over here. And that changes things. Now, mind you, they're not as landlocked, which will change things, but they do have a lot of hills and mountains that they have to deal with as well. I've never actually personally been out there, but just looking at the maps and seeing how it's all built out, they're a little landlocked as well, too. So interesting.
And that is a very tough development market. Like we've looked at that, and a lot of times you're not going to get the approvals to build a
Hmm.
huge track out in that North Carolina area. It could be very challenging. The hills prevent easily installing sewers, and sewers have to be there to have small lots. However, you bring up a good point in the Asheville area. If houses were destroyed in areas where a short-term rental is still legal, you'll see deeper and deeper pockets rebuilding assets that are much larger, nicer, majestic, magnificent views, with short-term rental in mind. So now all of a sudden,
Right.
whoever was there with maybe older product built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000 is having to compete with listings who are built
Right.
now, and you reset this whole new element. Now that could bring an even higher net worth individual to the area, and you might see some of that Florida renewal effect,
Yeah.
which will be supercharged, in my opinion, for the fact that Airbnb exists compared to how that market operated and functioned 20 years ago when people still visited there 20 years ago, but it's not like the last
Not
5 to 10
insane.
years.
So as you're saying all of that, all I'm thinking about is Joshua Tree, because what's happening out in Joshua Tree right now are mansions, luxury LA style, maybe not the mega mansions that you see out there, but they are these unbelievably beautiful 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom type, lot of concrete and those like the lot of rectangles, in the way that they're designed and put together with absolutely majestic pools and the way they're put together and all this stuff. And they're obviously a lot more expensive in comparison to everybody else, but these LA people are just kind of dumping their money into these now because it's that short-term rental market. And then you see these other homes that are not that I not even kidding. Right before we got on this call, I was analyzing a 2 bedroom, 2 bath out in Joshua Tree that was sold for just under $500,000. And there's almost no land to it either, which is like Joshua Tree's whole thing. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, what am I looking at? You know what I mean? Whereas if you were to go back pre-COVID, that would have been worth next to nothing. I could probably pull up the listing and see how much it was worth pre-COVID, right? Interesting though. It's almost like an Airbnb effect of the new builds, right? And people
Oh
willing to
yeah,
put so much more money into them because of the revenue.
100%. There's a
Interesting.
market in New Jersey that is somewhat Airbnb proof. It's 100% beach town vacation rental, and they're weekly listings. And you have to go. You start Saturday, you leave Saturday. There's no booking anything else. There are a few short-term rental listings that are there from kind of maybe somewhat eccentric folks who like own the houses. Um, New construction
Mm.
house, maybe 3,500 square feet. Right now is selling for like 4 to 4.5 million on a 6,000 square foot lot.
Jeez.
The tear down's going to run you it's softened a bit. The tear down will run you probably man, it's got to be close to $2 million right now because you're going to spend 1.5 million to 2 million building it with the construction prices today. And it's a small island, and the people from Pennsylvania and New York go there. It's kind of got that pizzazz, and it's been this, rental market
Yeah.
since forever in the beginning of whenever, 50s and 60s when it first got developed.
That well, I mean, that reminds me of like the 30A and like Destin and the Destin area in Florida.
Okay. Yep.
It's those homes are going for 4 million. There's almost nothing to them. They're actually the some of the coolest builds. I stayed in one like 2 years ago now, and it's like it was like either 8 or 12 bedrooms, but like luxury. And you go up, it's like it was 3 or 4 stories, and then they have a rooftop to it so you can like look out. Now it wasn't beachfront, but it was one off. So you could see, and then everything in it was just high quality all the way through. And then the backyard had like a nice pool in it and then an area to kind of sit, and that was it. So you're talking like same size lot that you're just saying, if not smaller, going for 4 million in that general area, which is and it'll make, $300,000 a year on Airbnb, and for some people that works to cover the basis. But while you were explaining that, I'm just going to go back to Joshua Tree for a second because I looked up that property that I was just telling you about, and now this is going back, but it originally sold in 2010 for $50,000,
Wow.
sold again in 2021 for $345,000. And then after it sold that time, it sold a year later for 470. So it went up well over $100,000 in a year. And then that person has just been trying to sell it since 2022. And it's just been like on the market, price change nonstop over and over again. Oh, over again. It just sold for 450, 430 actually.
Yeah, and that Joshua Tree, just like from looking at the map perspective, for people who aren't doing that, that's Southern California, and it's kind of desert area, right?
Correct.
You're
Yep.
you're like 3 4 hours from civilization in a sense. From LA, you're gonna be what, 3 hour drive? Looks like maybe.
2.5, but very close, very close. But
Yeah.
that's the perfect getaway distance. So like imagine you're in Chicago and you're like, I'm going to go away from Chicago for the weekend, and you drive 45 minutes out of Chicago. You're still in Chicago, right? For the most part, the burbs anyways, right? But then when you're in LA, it's the same idea. So you have to drive at least 2 hours to feel like you're on vacation and out of the city. And and if you but then 4 hours is too far, right? Because
Yeah,
now
100%.
you lose the whole Friday night. You're heading back on Sunday. Like you just lose it. So it's that beautiful circle from these major cities what causes that.
Yeah, and a lot of those major cities, Coachella, Palm Springs, like these are places where people have gone to vacation from California forever.
Yep.
Palm
And
Desert.
that area, those areas that you just mentioned have been built up for a very, very long time. And I do think that the Joshua Tree area might see a build out like you saw in those areas. Now, I think there's a bit of a difference because I think that the Palm Springs area has a bit of a valley, which keeps, maybe it's not a valley. Now I don't know what I'm saying. I know it well-ish, but not well enough to really know what the future holds. But there are just a ton of people building out in the Joshua Tree area.
Yeah, you're right about that. Cool. Let's switch gears and give at least one more nugget before we have to wrap up here on Airbnb. So we talked about finding the saturation. Is there any other underwriting strategy you think you could share to someone who's like kicking tires on thinking about an Airbnb and might give them enough to get more interested, let's say?
Well, to get you more interested, the properties that I tend to find, and you can go and look up my testimonial videos on my YouTube channel, tend to generate anywhere from 25,000 all the way up to $75,000 in profit, not revenue, profit, which is enough. You get a handful of those and you're sitting pretty. Um, and the way that you do this, right? So the recommendation that I have for everybody is to not study properties. I think I again just got off a call where somebody made this exact same mistake. They go, we can afford a home that is $500,000. We like this market because we heard about it from our guru. Now let me go find a $500 home in that market. And they just look for whichever property is usually at the max of their purchase price and they go, I'll buy that one, right? And these are the people who want it to be a cash cow for them, right? They're hoping that this Airbnb is going to make them a bunch of money, and they do next to no research to do it. Whereas, for yourself, you just wanted to have a vacation property. Completely understandable in that scenario. But if you're trying to find a property that's going to generate a good amount of cash flow, you got to do your research. And it doesn't start with the process that I just explained. Instead, what you have to do is figure out a handful of markets that you care about, okay? And then you want to look into that market to see if it has cash flow potential. And the way that I always explain to know if a market might have cash flow potential is the 20% rule, the price to rent ratio. So you want to be able to see that there are homes that are available for, let's say, $500,000. And you want to quickly be able to know if that $500,000 could make $100,000 a year, right? And if it could, that means it meets a 20% rule. So the revenue, that $100,000, is 20% of the purchase price, which would be the $500,000, right? And if you could see that very quickly looking into the market, then it's likely that there are properties in that market that will cash flow well, okay? One thing I'm going to stress here is that you can't just look at a regular average 4 bedroom middle class home and that's for sale for $500,000 and then go look at a luxury Airbnb listing that's making $100,000 and say, "Oh, they both have 4 bedrooms, therefore they're going to, make the same amount of money." Don't do that. Okay? There has to be like for like properties. But if you can see that, then you know that that market might have the potential to drive revenue for you. And so then at that point, what you want to do is review and analyze every single Airbnb that is in that market and try to understand what the top performers are doing that the underperformers are not doing. And if you can see what they have, those top performers have.
And are you doing this on Airbnb? So we're like first selecting the markets. Okay, I like Florida. And I'm using what, AirDNA, or am I using Airbnb to figure out if I would gross the 100K for the $500,000 house?
AirDNA.
Okay, so I'm
You're,
going to AirDNA.
yep, you're going to AirDNA.
And then am I also doing that to review like, what is my exact process to review every
Individual.
listing in that market?
So when you're on AirDNA, it's going to give you every property. in order of which one's making the most amount of money to which one's making the least amount of money. And so the whole thing about data is you're trying to find a pattern. There's always a story in the data. In other words, it logically makes sense why one property is making more than the other. Another easy visual for people is trucks are always more expensive than cars, right? Like a Ford F-150 is going to be more expensive than a Honda Civic. Obviously, a luxury car is going to be different, but a truck compared to a Honda Civic is always going to be more expensive because it offers more. It can tow, it has a truck bed, whatever, right? It's they even though they both only seat 5 people, that's not the idea. So Airbnbs are the same idea. Some offer more, some have a pool, some have a pickleball court, whereas other ones don't. And so then therefore they're making more money than the other one. So it logically makes sense why they would be making more because they're giving more to their guest who's staying there, right? So the guest has to pay more. And so what you do is you're on AirDNA and you're looking into that market and you have all the listings in order from who's making the most to who's making the least. You've removed all the bad data. Now, I'm not going to explain that. You just go to YouTube, look up Airbnb, good data versus bad data. I'll pop up a bunch of times and it'll explain it. Okay. And once you understand that, you're now only looking at the good data on AirDNA from who's making most to who's making the least. And you just click the links to the Airbnb listings themselves, go through the photos, and try to understand what do these top performers have that the underperformers don't have, right? Super simple. The market I was just looking into, all the top performers had a pool, right? And the ones that were making less didn't have a pool. That's a super straightforward one, right? Okay, cool. I need a pool. Now, all of these properties that have pools, what's the difference between the top performer and the underperformer, right? What's the differences between these ones? And the more you can learn and understand and study that, the more you will learn how to put together a listing that will meet that 20% rule and drive revenue for you at the amount that you're going to be very happy with. And that's the process.
How much time do you think someone spends? That half hour? Is it an hour? Is it 3 hours? Like should someone set the clock so they stay focused?
Well, I've been doing this for 6 years. So
Yeah, not
it's
you. I mean a beginner.
well, the reality is this is not a half an hour practice. This is not a 1 day practice. This is not like I got it, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a lot of research for 1 week, find the property, and we're going to be good to go. If you can do that, great, right? You landed on the first market you looked into, had met the 20% rule, and then you started looking into a certain subclass of properties, and you're like, hey, look at if I do this, I'll be able to buy a property in that market. We're good to go, and you got it figured out in a week, right? Just to put this in perspective, my course that explains how to analyze all the data and how to go step by step through all this, just the data part is about 25 hours to 30 hours long, right? So that's 1 week right there just to understand all the details. Okay. I know it's a lot, but there's a lot of things you got to look out for. And then what you want to do is kind of start going market to market to market. That's the part that's going to take a bit, is actually finding the market that has the cash flow potential. Because like I said, I've studied 350. I'm only in a handful for a very good reason. And so you got to find the market. Then once you find it, it depends on the size of the market. So I've studied Austin a few times, which is one of the bulkiest markets that you can study. And most times it's taken me from a week to 2 weeks to actually understand where to go in Austin and where not to go, right? Thoroughly. But if you were to have a smaller market, it would take less time. So what I'm trying to say is this is likely if you're like brand new, just getting started, and you want to do it right, or at least do enough to feel like you got it right, you're looking at anywhere from probably a month to 3 months of working this process through and with your spare time, because I'm assuming you're still working a job, so you're in your spare time, it's probably going to be somewhere between a month and 3 months of working to understand the data, understand the markets, understand what to do in those markets, understand the inventories available, and being able to find that property that's going to cash flow well for you. And I'm not
And
exaggerating by any means.
yeah, it's just like any other asset you're going to buy. You should not just be taking a flyer on a stock. You want to do the research, same as buying a flip, buying a rental, whatever the case is. How much cash on hand do you think you'd have to have there
So
to play the game? Like, do you got to have
yeah,
100, 200, 300,000? Like, what type of cash to make 25 to 75,000 profit per year?
we the lowest that we will work with, so for a client, is they have to have at least $150,000. And I can tell you right now, you can come to me with $75,000 and I can tell you what property to buy, but I'm not gonna be able to sleep at night because I know that in a very short period of time, maybe in a year from now, when we hit a recession, you're gonna be effed. Like you're going to be really, really screwed. So if you don't have $150,000 to compete over the next 5 years, I don't feel comfortable guiding you into a property. So that's the starting point, and that's going to get you on that lower end, right? That's going to put you at those maybe like the 20 to $25,000 a year in free cash flow. And obviously, the higher you go, the better it gets. We have some clients who have put $500,000 into their properties, and expect to make 75,000 cash or more. And you know, they're like there's other factors to it as well. I just want to stress that it's not just, hey, this property cash flows, but you paid, you know, $100,000 over the valuation of the property, right? And like that's just dumb real estate in the first place. Don't do that. So still get a good asset, but the good asset still cash flows for you, and you put enough into it to make it through the recession, so you can hold it for the next 5 to 10 years.
Nice. I have a couple of wrap up questions here. I know we're getting to the end of our time. So first of all, let's go with the crown jewel of wisdom. If you could go back and share with yourself when you were driving back from Florida after your failed mission there, and you know everything you know now, what would be the crown jewel of wisdom you would share with yourself then?
That's an absolutely beautiful question. I would tell my dumb younger self to start with regulation. So study the regulation before you study the data. It'll save you an outrageous amount of time because a lot of places just don't allow you to Airbnb. So learn the regulation first. And then I would tell myself to maybe get a couple of property management properties, but not rental arbitrage properties. And then put every second of time that I had into learning how to buy, raise money to buy, and do whatever I had to do to own the asset rather than managing other people's assets. And if I put 100% of my focus into that rather than building up an arbitrage company, rental arbitrage company, and management company, and cleaning company, and spending, you know, years doing that, I would say, hey, idiot, get enough money to pay your bills, then take the rest of your time and focus on how you can own the assets. Because when a COVID or a recession hits again, it'll be okay. You just cover your bills, you wait it out, and then you get it back going up again. But you don't lose everything that you had built over that time period, because recessions are going to happen every 8 to 10 years, no matter what. So, anyways, that's what I would tell myself as I was heading back. I wish somebody would be sitting beside me in that seat and be like, listen, this is what the game plan is going to be. Right? I had 24 hours to think, and that didn't cross my mind. So,
Wow, yeah, what an interesting time point for that question. So what would be a book or maybe two books,
mm,
not necessarily related to what we talked about today, but that have been most impactful for you, your mindset, career development, that kind of thing?
easy question. Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead. So both by
Nice.
Ayn Rand. I think Atlas Shrugged is one of the greatest books ever written about the reality of capitalism, and how great it has been. There are definitely flaws, but I think it is beautiful. And then additionally, Fountainhead is about integrity and what integrity looks like from over a 30-year period. Somebody with integrity, somebody without integrity, and they're both told in story forms. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned throughout both those books, but they're very engaging in the way that you read them, that kind of keep you captured and moving forward. But you know, just understanding the value of business, and then understanding the value of integrity over your lifespan, which is sometimes hard to realize when you're young, especially. So those are my hands down favorite books. Nothing really ever comes close.
Love it. Mark Cuban answered that question, not on my show, on another one, The Fountainhead. So it's cool. You share that with Mark.
That's, well, actually, Mark said it. He
Okay.
also said Atlas Shrugged, and I went and bought Atlas Shrugged, and then went and read it. And yeah, I owe him that. So
Sweet,
yeah,
sweet. So we found the source there on that one.
yeah.
You had mentioned this 25-hour course before we started. You mentioned that it's actually a little longer. Is that something you can share with listeners? What's the deal with the course?
Yeah, 100% free. So it's what you have to do is go to shop.strsearch.com, and then there's going to be an option at the top right that says free courses. And if you click that, you're actually going to get access to 6 free courses. Um, 5 of them are about 2 to 4 hours long, and then there's one that's 40 hours long. the data portion of it is 25 hours.
Nice,
And
nice.
yeah, it's yeah, like
Um,
I can't stress it enough. There's no better resource for understanding Airbnb data other than those courses. And I always tell people, like, they always ask, like, why did you give it away for free? And I say, because I'm not a good salesman, right? Just not good at selling people into things. I don't like to hold it back and be like, you got to pay me for that knowledge. And so instead I go, here's the knowledge. You can do it yourself. But if you don't want to do it yourself, you don't have the time to do it yourself, you can hire me. And I just like that business model more than other business models. So yeah.
cool. Very interesting. Is there anywhere else you want listeners to go? Maybe if they want to reach out and just say, "Hey, forget the course, John. Let me get you to find me the right property," or any other reason.
Yeah, so strsearch.com. If you want us to find you a property, we do have a 6-day money back guarantee. If we can't find you a property, we will give you 100% of your money back. I don't want your money if I don't find you a property, but we do a lot more than just find you a property. But the core of it is that we're getting you a good cash flowing property, and we have a 100% success rate. So thank you, Dan. I appreciate you asking that.
For sure. My final question I ask all the guests on the show is, what is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you, John?
Ooh, that is a really good question. Can I take a second here?
You got it.
I don't know. I can't think of a moment, but it's always my dad when it comes to this stuff. Just he just instilled like it's he just instilled the idea of being good and being a good person and being a good man and what that means. And, if you look at his career, he was a factory worker and a janitor for his entire life, but I think he's one of the most successful people I've ever met, in the sense that he had 9 kids and every single last one of us love each other. And he's got 18 grandkids and he's constantly happy. And at the age of 60, he decided to become a deacon and go through 4 years of university to be able to do that. And it's just the most, I feel extraordinarily lucky to have a dad like that. So, great role model. It's the kindest thing he ever did was have me and raise me properly. So appreciate him always.
Nice. I appreciate that. Hey, John, I got pages of notes. I had a blast and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me.